Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about anime and turds. We are here today to we are here today to study the political economy of bird shit and figure out how a mad genius and his friend could use it to rebuild civilization in a few years. Today we're talking about guano, which is accumulated shit from bats and seabirds. We normally associate it with bats, but the most important type comes from the cormorant. And at one point, it was the world's most important fertilizer.
Shit. Indeed.
Exactly. Yep. We're going to be doing that a lot, I have a feeling.
Yeah, this whole episode's going to be like, oh, shitty.
It's just going to be like, pun not intended, pun not intended.
Right.
So, guano is a Quechua word. Basically, it just means turd-based fertilizer. So,
cool. Yeah.
There's archaeological evidence of its use going back between 1500 and 5,000 years. So people knew that it was good for the soil for a long time. It mainly forms on islands off the coast of Peru and some other places. And basically, like, birds just eat a bunch and then they go to the island and they shit all over it. And it accumulates over years and becomes a big brick of fertilizer.
Incredible. Do you think the birds have like do they have like preferred islands to shit guano on, or like to shit on to make guano?
Well, they don't seem to, but there is a preference on what environment they shit it into because
interesting.
Yeah, because the English tried using guano from their own islands, and they found out that because they get a lot more rain than Peru does, it leaches away all the nutrients. So it's just a pile of shit.
It dissolves. Just imagining, just England, just massive patches of just liquefied bird shit lying around, and a bunch of like angry Victorians just like kicking at it with one foot.
So I'm gonna take a lot in this episode from this book called Guano and the Opening of the Pacific World, A Global Ecological History. And let me scroll back up to where the author is, because I don't remember who. Gregory T. Cushman. So at Cushbomb on Twitter, I think, is who that is. Yeah, and it's a really long book. I didn't make it even remotely all the way through. It's like 415 pages. So
damn.
Yeah. So very serious book, all about bird turds, and so I'm going to draw from that a lot. So in the intro, Cushbaum says he makes a point that we used to be a lot more reverent of excrement, and becoming turning into city people kind of separated us from natural cycles, and made it into an object of revulsion or humor,
right?
To the point now where we just don't realize that we have to recycle our shit in order to keep living, because otherwise we're depleting the soil and not replacing the nutrients that come out of it. And humans are particularly adept at wasting nutrients because we shit out 98% of the nutrients we take in.
Fuck.
In terms of what's good for plants.
Man, that sucks.
So let's see.
So basically, even when you eat drugs, you're wasting 98% of it.
Yeah.
Shit.
Cushbaum says that there are 5 ways that intensive agriculture can be maintained. Number 1 is soil mining, which means cultivating fields in soil that was built up naturally over time, which is what settlers in the United States did, because there used to be just insane amounts of really rich topsoil all over the U.S. And you can see a map. I think someone happened to tweet a map of it yesterday. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was listening to this audiobook last year about, it's called The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. I might have mentioned it before, but it's really interesting, and I stalled out because it is incredibly depressing. But the history of the Great Lakes, you know, like they talk specifically about how there was, like, in the Ohio region, you know, what we now call Ohio, south of Lake Erie, there was this massive, like, swamp forest, kind of like a jungle, you know, like a North American jungle that basically the settlers kind of coveted the soil there. You know, they were like, oh, fuck, like, it's so rich and fertile here. Like, I gotta have it. I gotta make a farm out of this. But, like, this jungle is just fucking impenetrable. Right. So then they always had to just go around it, and, like, you know, and, like, the indigenous people, like, respected the fuck out of this ancient forest, right? Like, and it was a truly ancient forest, as I recall. It was like one of these things that's just been around for, like, probably like 1 million years. Has its own kind of biome and everything, and just so the indigenous people, they, like, just kind of worked with it or around it, and they didn't fuck with it, you know. So the settlers come in, you know, they do what settlers do, and they tried to get into it, and they tried to, like, sort of penetrate and exploit this jungle. They couldn't do it, and then eventually, I forget which kind of industrial machinery, but some kind of, like, agricultural machinery was invented. It was, like, maybe steam powered, that enabled them to basically just mow down the entire fucking forest and, like, recompose, like, the whole region and turn it into these incredibly fertile farmlands. But the externality, the consequence of that was that we discovered very quickly, as, you know, people of this area, my half my family comes from that area, so, you know, fuck. But but they figured out very quickly that something was wrong with killing this forest off, right? And they figured out eventually that it was because the ecosystem, all the different kinds of plants and animals and, like, fungi and everything that lived there, were basically doing what the bugs and fungi do in Nausicaa, which is that they were, you know, they were filtering the water, they were preparing different kinds of nutrients for these feedback loops in this wider ecosystem, and so forth. And so then the rivers, and, like, I think it was also Lake Erie, turned brackish and gross, and, like, things died off, and, like, it went just to nightmare levels, you know. And so a lot of what you hear about, like, Lake Erie and, like, the rivers there, it wasn't all industrial waste. It was also the effects of soil mining that like was made possible by, like, old growth forest destruction and similar activities. So anyway, that's just, like, a little tidbit about, you know, the exploitation and the destruction of you know, the lands and the biomes.
Well, to that I say, whoopsie doopsie oopsie.
Yeah. Whoops.
Yep. Oops, we accidentally killed the ecosystem. Oh,
right.
Well.
Right.
I guess we won't do it next time.
Back. Yeah.
Does it next time anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I swear, I'm sorry.
So number one, intensive agriculture way, soil mining. Number two is soil manipulation, so using additives such as lime to enhance soil fertility.
Oh yeah.
Number three,
super common. Mm-hmm.
Symbiosis with microorganisms such as clover or legumes or wet paddy rice production, which fix nitrogen in the soil.
Child labor, right? You know, microorganisms working in your fields.
Yeah. Number four is recycling, so either composting or swidden or night soil, which is another word for using human shit as fertilizer.
Yep.
And number five is importing nutrients from elsewhere. So floodplains like the Nile Delta or coastal Peru are good for agriculture because the flooding that affects the plains is coming from uphill, where there's a bunch of nutrients that it's washing down with it. So
right. Yeah.
It's just getting nutrients from like the hills or the mountains or whatever.
Yeah. And this actually, speaking of the Nile Delta and the downhill effect, like, this is just also trivia, but like in the ancient days of Egypt, you know, with all the, like, in the earliest days when there was like 2 pharaohs before they combined it, you know, and made the double crown and all this shit. But I guess even also for people who are familiar with the region, like they call it the upper and the lower Nile. And it's because, you know, the upper Nile is upstream toward the slopes, you know, and that's where a lot of that water is kind of coming from, or like at least passing through. And the lower Nile is toward that delta area, you know, as, you know, lower is in that lower elevation. So, you know, dank ass river delta there.
So it's basically like instead of real pharaohism, it's crony pharaohism because
yeah, exactly.
They're using nature as one of their cronies to interfere in their agriculture.
What we really need to do is just, you know, remove the crown, and then the pharaohs will all be equal, and then everything will be fine. You know.
If you want to be a real pharaoh, you need to, you know, pull yourself up by your sandal straps.
That's right.
Get to work in the floodplains, or, you know, that's not right. In the floodplains actually, because that's cheating.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, you know, the Forbes top 400 self-made pharaohs list.
I think we need what we need to throw some Henry George in here. We need you know, a floodplain value tax.
That actually would kind of make sense in a way. Like Egyptian communism, that would kind of make sense. You're like, hey, look, like our nutrients are going to you, and then it's like it's a maximizer. So you're getting all kinds of cool shit. You're growing all this amazing shit. So why don't you just send, you know, an appropriate, proportional percentage of your fucking, you know, grains and shit back to us, you know, up the hill. That sounds nice.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So. Here's a passage about night soil, which again is human excrement used as fertilizer. Mm-hmm. Historically, the most productive and sustainable agricultural systems tended to combine all 5 of these methods. In the Valley of Mexico, indigenous cultivators raised wetland gardens known as chinampas used lake sediments, decayed vegetation, recycled human excrement, and later livestock manure to augment the fertility of their fields. Mm-hmm. Like ancient Peru, central Mexico possessed rich excremental folklore. Nice. In recent centuries, no one surpassed the farmers of southern China in these matters. In the Zhujiang Delta, Pearl River Delta, yep. Crop and excrement recycling, silt produced by upland erosion and aquaculture, enabled pre-industrial farmers to support an estimated 17 to 25 people per cultivated hectare while producing huge surpluses for export. To contrast, modern farming in the U.S. supports an average of 5 people per hectare.
Yeah, that's not great. That is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And we're super efficient, though. Also, I feel like I just have to say excremental folklore is a very long way of saying shit posting. But...
Damn.
Us on Twitter, we're all just excremental folklorists.
Yeah. Again, in Peru, guano is produced in large, high-quality amounts on islands right off the coast. So early on, coastal groups of people, I can't remember what they're called. It's like the... I'm not going to try it.
Dwellers?
Oh, no, it's like an ethno group, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So they controlled the islands and the guano at first, but the Inca Empire, who lived up on high, later established control over the islands. They kept a close watch over them and imposed the death penalty on anyone who either lands on the islands during breeding season or kills any of the birds at any time.
Oh wow! Holy shit!
Yeah, and control of the islands was assigned to provinces. This is a passage from... this is from Wikipedia, actually, but whatever. In November 1802, Prussian geographer and explorer Alexander von Humboldt first encountered guano and began investigating its fertilizing properties at Callao in Peru. And his subsequent writings made the subject well known in Europe. Cool. So Europeans were aware of its fertilizing properties, but I guess they weren't impressed or something like that. But it really took off when Cornish chemist Humphrey Davy wrote a best-selling book called Elements of Agricultural Chemistry, where he talks about the role of nitrogenous manure as a fertilizer. And it was like the most popular book ever written on farming at the time. Let's see. American historian Wyndham D. Miles said that no other work on agricultural chemistry was read by as many English-speaking farmers.
Wyndham D. Miles sounds like it's just like the name of like a villain in Carmen Sandiego or something. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's supposed to be, but it just sounds that way. Yeah.
So in the early 19th century, commercial whaling, which is a topic for another episode, spread to Peru, which brought a lot of supporting industry along. Because whaling is a huge industry, requires a lot of logistics, and it is a very valuable, it's a very profitable trade. So that meant they needed to buy stuff to take back with them. So they started looking for valuables to bring back. And they fell upon guano.
Put their foot right in it.
Yeah, they fell in a big pile of bird shit.
Like, wow, this is good, actually.
Yeah, literal tons of it. So Ramon Castilla, who was the 20th president of Peru, he opened up the guano mining industry. He put state control over it, and anyone who extracted it would have to pay royalties. And but other than that, he opened the mines up for exploitation. So they got a lot of revenue from this, which they used to abolish slavery and pull taxes on indigenous people, which is good. But also, with no slaves, they needed lots of labor to mine the guano that was being used to free the slaves that would have been mining the guano.
Okay.
So instead of black chattel slaves, guano mining during the guano era was done by blackbirded Chinese slaves.
Fuck.
So very cool. And then the U.S. did the opposite on its island of Navassa, switching from white convict slaves to blackbirded black men after the Civil War to mine guano. And the brutal conditions there led to a slave revolt, resulting in 5 overseers being killed, which...
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I like that part.
I hope they got mulched.
So I mentioned it already a little bit, but the period from Castilla's rule up until the Chincha Islands War was actually called the Guano era. And it's considered a time of prosperity and stability in Peru. And from 1840 to 1879, which was the peak guano extraction time, Peru exported an estimated 12.7 million tons of guano, valued at 100 million pounds.
Goddamn.
Most of it was bought by Great Britain, who used it for turnips, rutabagas, which they call Swedes, which is kind of funny, and Mongolwurzel, which is some kind of beet.
Okay.
It's also called like root of scarcity or something like that. Sounds really what's the word, gristly to me.
Yeah.
And they grew turnips, rutabagas, and Mongolwurzel to use as cattle feed. So this was Victorian England, and this was when they actually stopped letting fields go to fallow, and instead just put all of their energy into high intensive agriculture, So they were just constantly adding fertilizer to the soil to grow cattle feed, so that they could eat cattle, and I guess probably export cattle. The Victorians called it high farming. And
I mean, I don't know how high you could get off of snorting bird shit, but if the Victorians could do it,
well, it will fuck you up, but not in the way you want.
Yeah, right.
And there were critics of high farming. There was a German chemist, maybe, I don't know, some chemist guy, and he said, like, sure, it works in the short term, but you're setting yourself up for a much bigger failure in the long term, which he did not know the half of. But he was right. Because this marks the turn from, fairly sustainable medieval agriculture to completely unsustainable modern industrial agriculture.
Right. Which rampant like degradation of the land. Yeah.
Yeah. If you just Google soil depletion, you'll see articles that say like 1/3 of arable land has been lost in the last 40 years.
Yep.
Shit like that.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. And this is also around the time that the Irish potato famine happened.
Mm-hmm.
So DNA evidence combined with contemporary observation by Jean-Baptiste Boussingault supports the theory that the famine was caused by a type of potato that was imported from Peru in the 1840s, which carried a fungus that infected the sole variety of potato that the Irish people depended on.
So I will say what I have heard is that the fungus story is like the popular story.
Uh-huh.
But that actually a lot of it may have had an effect. Yeah, it did have an effect, but I've heard this before. I from seemingly good sources, and I just pulled up an article about it as well that says, and I'll just quote. This is from Paste Magazine, but whatever. While the blight did strike and take down most of Ireland's potatoes, the truth is that Ireland was exporting more than enough food to feed everyone at the same time as the famine was happening. Run as a colony of the British Empire, Ireland was a colonial food-producing operation, much like India and the Sugar Islands of the Caribbean. The locals were not allowed to eat the very food they were producing. Sounds familiar, right? So basically, these people starved because they were forced to make the potatoes, but they either couldn't have it or they couldn't afford it. Ireland's economy had always been subservient to British interests. Quinnipiac University professor Christine Keneally says, following the appearance of the potato blight, a number of people in Ireland requested the government to close the Irish ports to keep food inside the country. So they basically were like, look, we're making the food. Let's just keep it here and let us eat that food that exists and hasn't rotted or gone fungal or whatever. And the Brits refused to do so on the grounds that merchants would bring food in under free market forces. And this did not happen.
Right.
The merchants did not bring that food. Or at least when they did, it was not affordable.
Well, it did happen according to free market forces.
well, right. Yes. As actually existing capitalism. Yes.
So I saw this mistake immediately in my own notes and didn't correct it. So I'll just say it caused the Irish potato blight, not the famine. The famine was caused by England.
Yes. The English, they love starting famines.
Yep.
Bangladesh, Ireland.
They love to start famines. It's their favorite thing, pretty much.
Yeah.
One thing that the author added, I think I might be remembering it from a different place, but if I remember correctly, the author pointed out that a lot of the issue in assessing how impactful a famine was is that most people don't die of starvation during a famine. They actually just get their immune systems are weakened and they die from mainly diarrhea diseases.
Oh, diarrhea! Oh shit!
Yes. Yeah. So more people were killed by epidemic dysentery than by
actual starvation,
like the plague.
Yeah. Oh fuck.
Yeah, like more than any other disease in Europe. They were killed by dysentery due to starvation.
That's deeply fucked up.
Yep, shitting to death.
Yep.
Surreal poop themed episode.
Yeah.
I was telling Diane that last night I was looking online for fiber capsules and bidets. So my whole week has just been all about pooping.
Well, sometimes you have those weeks,
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't quite finish it off.
So next we get to the Chincha Islands War.
Okay.
Which started up in 1864 when Spanish ships captured several of the guano-rich Chincha Islands in retaliation for Peru's refusal to pay indemnities from the Peruvian War of Independence. So they said that they owed Spain money for the war, and Peru was like, no, go fuck yourselves, and Spain captured a bunch of their islands. They later blockaded Valparaiso, and that caused such immense commercial damage that it was protested by both the U.S. and the U.K. So it was bad if they were standing up for a former colony in South America.
Right.
So eventually Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador allied with Chile to fight back against the dirty Spaniards. The Spanish fleet in one battle leveled Valparaiso and sank 33 ships in Chile's merchant fleet, which set it back decades.
Jeez.
But at this point, the Chincha Islands were already near depletion of guano. I guess I didn't write how the war concluded. So basically, so then
they just kept fighting. They're still fighting.
Yeah. No, it was like they signed a treaty, and basically Spain acknowledged that Peru was a real country, and they basically just backed off. They didn't really get much out of it. I don't think. The Spanish fleet was defeated by the Alliance, which was pretty humiliating for them. But then they, of course, claimed that they didn't really lose. They're not mad. They're actually laughing.
Yeah, right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, around the end of this war, the Chincha Islands were already near depletion of their guano supplies. And guano was soon replaced with Chile saltpeter, which is a sodium-based nitrate found in the nearby Atacama Desert.
So saltpeter is also an ingredient in gunpowder.
Yes.
So, yep.
Yeah, Chile saltpeter is it's very similar to regular saltpeter, but yeah, it's spicier. Exactly.
Spicier gunpowder.
Yeah. It's like fire in your mouth. Yeah. In 1879, the War of the Pacific began. Chile invaded the coastal part of Bolivia to claim its guano and saltpeter. Because of an alliance between Bolivia and Peru, Chile also attacked Peru. Chile won the war and gained control of the coastline all the way up to Peru. So, before this war, it looked very similar to the current map, except in between Peru and where Chile now begins, Bolivia extended out to the coast for a little segment. And so after this war, Chile went all the way up to the border of Peru.
Okay.
Chile also gained control of some of Peru's Guano Islands. And so after the war, Chile's national treasury grew 9 times larger with revenue from the newly annexed lands.
Damn.
And finally, Peru has been attempting to revitalize the seabird population that was depleted during this time for over 100 years now. following the recommendations of some conservation scientists that studied it. But the population is still only about 1/20th of what it was in the late 19th century.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Ugh, man. Why do we have to keep killing all these fucking living things? It's so fucking annoying. Like, it just pisses me off, hearing about this shit.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, you need people to make iPhones.
Yeah, right.
If you like iPhones, then we need to kill everything. So,
yeah.
Up to you, really.
I need this glowing toy so that I can do my my business deals and find idiots to fuck in my spare time and order food with my big money that has been prepared by people who don't get paid enough, who by all rights should be cutting my throat right now, but instead they're just biding their time. Yeah, whatever.
Anyway, so the next section, I'm pretty proud of this title. I just want to read the title. The next section is United States of Bird Shit, Confederate States of Bat Shit. So nice. I'm just going to read right off of Wikipedia here. The demand for guano led the United States to pass the Guano Islands Act in 1856, which gave U.S. citizens discovering a source of guano on an unclaimed island exclusive rights to the deposits. In 1857, the U.S. began annexing uninhabited islands in the Pacific and Caribbean, totaling nearly 100 islands. Several of these islands are still official U.S. territories. Conditions on annexed Guano Islands were poor for workers, resulting in a mutiny on Navassa Island, which I mentioned, in 1889, where black workers killed their white overseers. In defending the workers, lawyer Everett J. Waring invoked that the men could not be tried by U.S. law because the Guano Islands were not legally part of the country. The case went to the Supreme Court, where it was decided in Jones v. United States in 1890. The court ultimately decided that Navassa Island and other Guano Islands were legally part of the U.S. American historian Daniel Immerwahr claimed that by establishing these land claims as constitutional, the court laid the basis for the legal foundation for the U.S. empire. The Guano Islands Act is now considered America's first imperialist experiment.
That makes sense. It's weird how these little things. This is actually a good way to talk about. It's a good case, literally a case, to talk about how easily even a well-intended state structure, bureaucracy, whatever, essentially permanent ossified institution that isn't accountable to a direct democracy of any kind, something like the legal system or the state bureaucracy can again, it can be well intended. I can't prove that the founding fathers were actually imagining an American empire as it is now, right?
Right.
All I can do is reasonably suspect that they were a bunch of racist fucks who really loved money and land and wanted it to themselves and wanted to use popular power to get that, Anyway, but this case really illustrates how the creep happens, and how little things, little tiny little slivers of creep can happen that then open up these broad avenues of exploitation. And in a system like capitalism that is about very explicitly about exploitation, rampant exploitation that's performed at kind of a only semi-centralized sort of chaos level. These sorts of things quickly become exploited, and when they're exploited, they're exploited to the fullest extent of the power of the state at any given moment. It just goes as far as they possibly can, which is why we've got bases fucking everywhere in the world,
Right.
So the Guano Islands, they really fucked us up on this one.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, with regard to bases all over the world, it's kind of just the sedentary version of what states are always like, which is whenever there's merchants outside of the the center of the state, they're always followed by troops or warships or whatever. So like the whaling cruise that went down to Peru, there was a bunch of warships that were nearby in case there was like privateering or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or presumably worker uprisings.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think of Connie Kosen, which there was a worker uprising on this crab cannery ship, and it was kept down by the Japanese Navy because they had a destroyer nearby, and the boss radioed for the destroyer, and it came over and was like, get back to work.
Right. Yeah, that's the big fucking problem with all this. It's just there's like layers and layers of control, and like fallbacks, and so you've got your various kinds of exploitation that are then backed up by like different kinds of muscle. So it just, again, it like basically completely blows away the idea of like stateless capitalism. Like, it's like, no, you gotta be fucking out of your mind. Like, you haven't read a single goddamn book. Like, you don't know shit about history. You don't know shit about like economics in the real world. Like, fuck you.
I'm starting to get over the use of the word capitalism at all, because it's like, the problem is the state. The problem has always been the state, and capitalism is just like a type of state with some like really specific characteristics that the vast majority of people do not care about.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective, and like I'm inclined to sympathize. Like, I think that
because like, look how it's characterized. Okay, so it's like one, class divisions. That's a characteristic of states. Two, private property. It's a characteristic of states. Private ownership of the means of production, characteristic of states.
Right.
Use of money, characteristic of states. Like, what else is there? It's basically just like the use of finance as the primary operating logic.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the main thing, at least as we understand it now, is that
and the source of legitimacy.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, the source of legitimacy, and that's actually linked to, like the kind of, it's kind of like one of these iron triangles or whatever, where it's like the source of legitimacy is essentially shared between the state and the corporations. The corporations are a particular set of possible working arrangements that are considered legitimate, right? And then by behaving in those ways, which is essentially, as we've talked about, like, it's kind of as a bureau of the state or an organ of the state, and the state is kind of the supplier of force for the corporations, at least at this point. But then the corporations themselves typically act as microstates in many ways, or like in the case of like transnational corporations and conglomerates, like just like non-territorial states, or like maybe not like non-territorial because they have to be on land anyway or like somewhere, but like territorially unfixed states, like they can lift up and go somewhere else, and that's actually one of their weapons.
Like thalassocracies and stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right. So exactly, and so they're kind of like semi-mobile, because what they're concerned about is, as with the original phases of what we call capitalism, they're concerned with stock and flows, but they're also concerned with labor, because labor's inescapable, but you can get labor anywhere if you can just like get the formal state to cooperate and help you out, and you make deals and all this shit. So it's kind of like, this is kind of where I think that the so you hear like the nationalists freaking out about globalism, and I think that it's like their analysis is kind of bad and dumb typically, but I see kind of what they're seeing, which is that like the cell walls of what they thought was like a discrete nation or something like that, which isn't always just borders, but it's like like they talk about culture, they talk about values, but they talk about the way we do things, right? I see their paranoia arises because they realize, oh, actually, we can also be exploited in turn, and labor is just kind of this abstract mass of people to these exploiters. But what they fail to, I think, realize is that like they're defaulting to like, oh, we have to have our state win, right? That's basically the point. And that's it's this predatory reaction. From like a fear that rises from like a kind of intuitive, like a gut check about the penetration of a kind of a state capital complex that just kind of like goes and sort of dissolves all things before it. And it's capitalism is the gray goo problem, right? Yeah. Like you know what I mean, but like for people who are not familiar, gray goo is this idea of like like a sort of a thought experiment of like, what if we created like these nanomachines, that
could like consume stuff and then self-replicate.
Right, exactly. For like industrial purposes or whatever, but then like they get out of control and they just do it for their own purposes. Like they essentially do it mindlessly, like in a viral way.
Yeah.
And then they take over the entire world and turn every last fucking thing into gray goo, which is them. Right, but they don't have any other purpose. They just consume, and I'm like, well, that's literally how this system works. It's just mindless consumption and self-replication.
Yeah, that's also the plot of Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a PS4 game.
Oh, it's a game. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's a really good PS4 game, and basically, what I'm guessing is the United States in this story creates some self-replicating military robots, and the robots are able to take in organic matter to power themselves. Okay. And so they basically self-replicate ad infinitum and consume all organic matter on Earth.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, honestly, it's what they would do because they have a directive. Yeah. It's kind of like, it also reminds me of the Blom concept, except with like that has like mega structures, right?
Yep.
So it kind of goes the opposite way in terms of scale.
And there was no concerns about resource depletion there, but
yeah. So
giant, unforgiving city with a bunch of killbots in it. So
right. So this is the interesting thing, right? Is that let's make an analogy, and it's a bit of a wild analogy, but I think people will get it because we have faith in you, faithful listeners. So you think about ecology. Guano is this integral part of these ecosystems. It comes from a living thing because the living thing needed to feed on something else to reproduce itself, essentially, to in the Marxian sense, but also to like make more offspring, right? And so then guano is a byproduct of the life and existence and activities of these birds, these bats, etc. The guano then becomes a source of energy, and in a sense, in terms of its like the fact that it's like a material in which the plant can be rooted, it turns into a home for like a new plant, which is a really weird thing to think about because you're like, well, it's shit, but it can be the house for a plant, or it can be a house for bugs or whatever. And then those things go on and live, and they create byproducts, and everybody feeds on each other's byproducts, or on each other to some extent. Like we eat plants, and some of us eat animals and things like that. We drink water. Sometimes the water has microbes and things. Well, it always has microbes in it that may feed or affect our gut flora. Things like that. So this is like this beautiful, incredibly like infinitely diverse like universes within universes, all working together in passive and active ways, and they create vitality, right? They create and maintain like abundance and like
flourishing, and all these other words that we all have in our languages to describe the world that we're supposed to inherit, the natural world, in the sense that it's the proper world, and the natural world. Yeah, it's the feckin' world. All right, yeah, exactly. But nobody says that fucking word. So we're the only ones who fucking use that word. But like the world that is both natural in that it's proper and natural in that it's like, it's this ecology. Then you have the gray goo concept, which is hypothetical, but at this point in our industrial development, it's barely
not that hypothetical.
Exactly. It's getting there. And it basically is a species of automaton that mindlessly consumes and produces, such that it more or less uniformly covers the world, or at the very least that any variant of possibility comes from it, as a permutation. And that is the basic
over paradise and
exactly
puts up a parking lot.
Yes, exactly. And the parking lot is made of its horrible little bodies. But that's the difference. That's the difference between liberatory political economy and fascist political economy, just like all this horrific, dominating kind of right-wing shit that may come in many colorful disguises, but it's really just about like, I eat, you don't. I kill, you die. I get, you don't get. And shades of permission under dominance that permit those systems to kind of survive so that like the dominator can thrive only, but really like, right. Yeah, that's the basic difference, is that like we who love life tend to think about and understand life as it must be and as it is and as it has been and what we must restore it to become. And people who are more obsessed with their kind of own aggrandizement or with attaching themselves to some project of power, like, hierarchical, exploitative power, like capitalism, like fascism, like imperialism, like, racist, colonial, whatever, all these things. And even in the very old days, like the domination of the outer farmlands and riverlands by like central walled cities and things like that, all these things. That's the line. That's the left-right divide right there, right?
Agreed.
You can talk yourself blue in the face about like morality and concepts of justice and everything like that, right? You can talk yourself to death about scarcity versus abundance,
or ownership of the means of production.
Right. And these are things that you can talk about. You can use it to form conceptions of the world and how to deal with it, right? They're tools. But ultimately what it comes down to is, do you want to live in a world where guano is fucking awesome and you can get bricks of it to make farms, if only you respect those birds and their territory and their flying space? Or do you want gray goo? That's the fucking choice, to put it in book
brown brick or gray goo.
Exactly, brown brick or gray goo, and wasn't it Bookchin who said, anarchy or annihilation? Like, it's basically what we're facing, but it's always been the question. It's always actually been the question. It's
fascism or barbarism. I choose barbarism.
Yeah, right. So, who knew that bird shit would carry us to such heights of philosophy?
So I forgot about the Confederate part in that United States of bird shit, Confederate States of bat shit, and it's really brief. Basically, during the Civil War, there was a blockade that prevented them from making gunpowder. So they used bat cave based saltpeter to make gunpowder.
Wow. So damn.
Yeah.
The inventiveness of humanity.
Yep. And fortunately today, we don't use guano fertilizer for most of our agriculture. Instead, we make nitrogen from natural gas and phosphorus from rock dissolved in acid. and the acid is also made of natural gas. So
cool.
But also we also use guano fertilizer in organic farming. So good stuff. So one part of this book that it sounded really interesting, but I didn't get to because I literally started reading it last night. Was the author suggests that guano also started the rise of technocrats.
Oh yeah.
So, like, the mass dependence of state society on chemical fertilizers and other chemical and scientific products led to the rise of scientists, engineers, economists, and other experts to positions of authority within the state. So, if the early colonial era represented the rise of merchant power, where, you know, you had these merchants going to foreign lands and stealing their resources and bringing it back, the late colonial era represented the rise of technocrat power, where the resource exploitation led to increasingly complex technologies and industry, which required a ever larger hierarchy of experts to govern it.
There's that creep again, right? There's that creep. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So Humboldt, who we mentioned earlier, the Prussian naturalist, guy who walks around nude all the time. I think that's what a naturalist is. So he was intimately involved in this process. So he prominently challenged the legitimacy of Spanish rule over the Americas. And the main part of his objection was because of their treatment of the soil. Not any of the slaves or indigenous people, but the dirt. And that was a well-received and highly regarded critique at the time. He also had a correspondence with Simón Bolívar, the revolutionary leader that overthrew the Spanish colonizers. And Jean-Baptiste Boussingault, who I mentioned earlier, he was a French scientist who laid the foundation for understanding the nitrogen cycle, using both nitrogen-fixing crops like clover and Peruvian guano when he was able to get it. And Simón Bolívar attempted to appoint Boussingault to a governorship in Gran Colombia, but Boussingault refused and returned home instead. So I didn't get to any of the other parts of this, but it sounds very interesting and it makes sense to me. You know.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that the fixation on the uses of bird shit is responsible for all the chicken shits that are in our government now, like David Frum and who else are we thinking of? Like fucking literally anybody at this point. Like, I mean, all the fucking assholes who show up on Fox News and MSNBC to convince us that actually death cults are good for our, moral character or something.
Yeah, I mean, experts are like the primary source of legitimacy for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Where, we have to do things this way because X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Where X, Y, and Z are like supposedly rational things.
Right.
Instead of like, earlier it would have just been like, oh, because God has ordained it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, and even like, you think about it as like, it's a tool of persuasion. It's a manufacturing of consent, to use a phrase that I'm sure nobody's ever heard before. It's one way, a very powerful way, to get people to just kind of go along, and also it's also a really good way, as we see a lot on Twitter and in like the kind of talking heads media, for the state or like, state adjacent actors to
just continuously muddy the waters so that even if they don't have your consent, they've sort of paralyzed you and they've fucked up the discussion like just beyond recognition. So they've got your, your experts, your kind of pseudo experts, and then all the way down to just like your bottom feeder ending types, and like just people just saying shit to say shit, and I think that's probably part of that effect. Is just that like, well, I'm the expert on, or like I reported this, and so you can't contradict me. Like my story is the right story. It's kind of fusing the kind of gray areas of just common rumor with like the propaganda apparatus is what I'm saying, and experts are part of that propaganda apparatus. So then, somebody like fucking Ben Shapiro, can be like, fucking, his whole fucking shtick is that he's an expert, but he doesn't know shit, or he does, but he's a liar,
He's an expert in logic.
Right. It's ridiculous. It's extremely.
Yeah, my favorite thing is that like the most authoritarian people online now, they all have like facts and logic in their bio. Like they've overtaken the God, family, country contingent of the authoritarians, I think, where they like with someone who says God, family, country, they're full of shit. They're really fucking stupid. They think there's a magical man in the sky that talks to them at night. And with the facts and logic people, it's like, oh, well, maybe they're just wrong. But they do think things through. No, it's actually the opposite. They think things through less than anyone.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
They just think they're right all the time. Yeah.
They're sort of solipsistic.
Anyway. Yeah. I don't know how we got to this from you mentioning Talking Heads. I don't know. I like the Talking Heads. I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, why not?
How Bizarre, good song,
Yeah.
Ooh, baby, it's making me crazy.
This is all making me crazy.
I think that's Talking Heads. Let's see. So in chemistry, guano had uses as well. So guano, especially bat guano, is high in potassium nitrate, one of the ingredients of black powder. Here's where that passage went. Okay, so here's the passage from the Confederate thing. But anyway, so basically the scaling up of the nitrogen trade led to the discovery of many other explosives, even beyond black powder, including gun cotton and TNT.
Oh, wow.
The famous AC/DC song.
Yes.
Nitrates are also needed in the production of sulfuric acid, which is highly central to the chemical industry. So basically, like the rise of what we call industrial civilization could not have occurred without large quantities of bird shit.
Yeah, wow, holy shit. That's
exactly.
It's amazing.
Yep.
It's amazing.
So we have an anime tie-in, one that we've mentioned a couple times already, but Dr. Stone involves bat shit. Early on, Senku uses it to produce nitric acid, which he combines with alcohol to form some other thing. I don't know. I suck at chemistry. And then later on, he uses potassium nitrate to make black powder in order to fight back against Tsukasa, who is much stronger than he is, but he doesn't have any guns. So, and someone in the comments for on Crunchyroll pointed out that he actually could have made gun cotton a lot more easily.
Oh, really? Some nerd.
like all you need for that is you take nitric acid and you basically mix it with any cellulose So like plant pulp, and then it turns
yeah.
into explosive cotton, which works even better than black powder. It's the basis of cordite, which is the British branded, smokeless propellant that was popular in World War One. Yeah, gun cotton. Interesting.
That's good to know. I wish that I were, more chemically inclined myself. That'd be cool to, make it home, for shits and giggles.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you would think that it would like explode really rapidly, like gunpowder, but it actually just like burns. It's just that like it's a sort of like it's a fairly swift burn, but if you combine it with both like a thin shape that will burn faster and a bunch of other things, a bunch of other little strands of gun cotton, then it burns quick enough to propel a bullet. And another fun fact is like the real name is nitrocellulose gun cotton, and one of its first uses was actually film. The early U.S. film industry used nitrocellulose film until they realized, oh yeah, that's right, it's a smokeless propellant that will catch on fire very easily.
Right.
So they had a bunch of theater fires, and then they decided to use something else, which they called safety film because it wouldn't kill you. The last thing about Dr. Stone that I'll mention is I think that Senku represent I hate to phrase it this way. In my interpretation, Senku represents the state, employing the labor of others and using science to conquer the non-state people who are represented by Tsukasa. So he's almost like a revanchist because he wants to restore modern civilization to its former glory,
right?
By saving literally everyone, even though like we were on this unsustainable path that definitely would have killed everyone.
Yeah.
So now he's just going to repeat it all over again.
Just do it all. Yeah.
Now that there's a bunch more guano, we can start the whole process all over again.
Yeah.
Do all the sod busting in the U.S. and all that shit.
God damn it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think Senku he might not be intentionally evil, but he happens to be evil. Mm-hmm. And Tsukasa is the lesser evil, even though he's like sort of kind of murdering people, even though they're statues and not really alive.
Right. Well, if they're statues, it's fine, right?
And the one piece of supporting evidence that I have for this is that Senku compares Tsukasa to a white lily, which in Japanese culture represents purity and innocence.
Oh.
So it's almost like he's calling him like a child, like or a savage or something.
Right. Because
I think
like a noble.
I think
savage.
all the mythology around savages was kind of the same thing, as they were pure and innocent, but in a way that was bad.
Right. Like you're so innocent, you'll never really do what I want you to do for me and my state. But
you're so innocent, which is why I have to force you to do what I want you to do.
Right, exactly.
Because I know better.
I respect you in an ideal sense, but I don't respect you in a very real sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's what I have for all that stuff.
Yeah, fascinating. I honestly, I didn't know guano was so interesting.
Yeah, it's really fucking interesting.
Yeah.
I don't remember how I happened upon it, but I ended up on the Wikipedia page, and I was like, wow, this is really long.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Man, how are we going to get ourselves some, few bags of pigeon shit, really, really kick off a nice science project.
That's true nutrient recycling, because they eat all the discarded bagels and stuff in the city.
True, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Reducing food waste by using pigeon shit as fertilizer.
Hell
yeah. I mean, I think the real thing is like we're eventually going to have to stop separating ourselves from nature, and our farming is just going to have to take place where there's naturally more nutrient cycling, or we have to, kind of reorder eco space, I guess, to put nutrient cycles closer to where we are, Yeah. Does that make sense? Like we can't be importing shit from other places.
Oh, yeah. Like localism, basically.
Yeah, but to kind of an extreme. Where,
aggressive.
Yeah,
I'm all for that.
I'm an open borders and open fields communist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So,
do we have anything else we want to talk about?
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of reclaiming land for to restore a little ecology for everybody's sake. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but like just this idea I have for after everything really hits the fan and maybe we actually get back some of our commons and stuff, but we should really be digging up probably about half the roads out there, especially once we get rid of actually really cut down on the car thing. Dig it all up and do the best we can with all the techniques that have been developed to promote super rapid quote unquote old growth regrowth and gardening and stuff where you can, I think it was an Indian or a Japanese naturalist who figured out how to simulate old growth, but in 10 years, you could get 100 years of growth. Yeah. And it was a particular way of approaching it. But anyway, so basically, I'm thinking combine tearing up all these roads that are just fucking pointless and disgusting to look at. And they're literally just sitting on top of the ground, which shouldn't have roads on them. It should have other beautiful things on it, including bird shit. And then you take your guano and you take your your old growth techniques and you take all this other shit and all your seed bombs and seed banks and everything, and you basically just aggressively rehabilitate the freed up land. And the beautiful thing about it is that then you could have say every few blocks, residentially and even maybe between businesses and stuff downtown, etc. You'll have these giant strips of garden and forest growing. And because of the structure, the I guess the geometric structure, linear structure, network structure of the roads, these strips can connect to each other and they'll basically turn into kind of an interstitial jungle. And I think that would be a really cool project for us to embrace once we axe the cappies. So
Sweden, but for civilization.
Exactly. It'd be fucking fantastic. Plus it'd be really good for our mental health. And also there'd be a lot more shade and it would maybe eat up a little bit of the extra carbon dioxide, even though I know a lot of that is up in the stratosphere. I get that. But you could always do with more,
Dude, it's insane the difference between a neighborhood that is shaded by trees and a neighborhood that is not shaded by trees.
Oh yeah, it's
in terms of temperature, it's fucking crazy.
It is nearly night and day.
Yeah,
it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
I
think we need to move beyond seed bombs though, and have seed mech suits.
Oh, I agree.
We need a seed Gundam.
This is almost exactly what I was thinking the other day. I was thinking more in terms of a seed grenade launcher. I was thinking about how do we force
seed Moab?
yeah, exactly. Seed NASA, just massive rockets just blasting.
Folks, they call it the mother of all seed bombs. It's very big. It's so big. What a big boy.
How many you start measuring your seed bombs in kilotons and megatons, and oh my god, the blast radius on the seed bomb! There'll be jungle here for millions of years. But yeah, I was thinking how do we basically surreptitiously force
like monocultures to develop polycultures. I was like, how do we do that without literally just revolting against the corporations and like the people manning these farms and stuff?
Yeah, and it's hard. I was thinking about this because, and I mean, right now provides a great example of the uphill battle that it is because fascists are burning down the Amazon right now.
Fuck.
And so, even if what's it called? Covertly, plant all these trees and build up these forests, someone can just come up and burn it down,
Yeah, yeah. At that point,
our destructive power is far beyond our regenerative power.
Yeah, I mean, this comes right back to the gray goo analogy, right? Like, just, burning down the rainforest is basically a human equivalent to the gray goo thing. It's just one way we do this, right? Versus, respecting it, giving it its distance, working around it, working with it, becoming part of it if you feel like, you want to go the kind of the way of those many indigenous people who have learned to do that. Though at this point, I think it's pretty late. But it's pretty dismal. Like, we could plant all this stuff and then some dipshit will burn it down. And I think that, this is where the battle kind of, becomes war. Like you try to do one thing right, somebody fucks with you or fucks you up or whatever.
So we need President Bernie Sanders to, send the bombers into Sao Paulo to destroy the Capitol building.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, then you get collateral damage, then you kill innocent people, quote unquote. And, you end up with all sorts of political problems and problems of persuasion, So then they drag their experts.
Well, I guess we can just send in SEAL Team 69 or whatever.
Right. We get we could develop a seed bomb that plants things in people, so that at least when we like shoot somebody, we're creating life. That's the real shit.
We'll send heroic Mujahideen fighters in to fuck out Dan Crenshaw's other eye hole.
Yes.
Have you seen this Twitter controversy?
Yes.
So for those who are out of the loop, we mentioned Hassan Piker, I think, on our last episode with John. Mm-hmm. And he's getting attacked by right-wingers now because they found an old video of his where he's talking about Dan Crenshaw. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, so you invaded a foreign country and then some heroes fucked out your eye hole. And now you have to wear an eye patch and you look like a fucking stupid asshole. And now he's all pissed about it, but he's, trying to say he's not mad. He's actually laughing.
Right.
And that Hassan is actually triggered, etc. It's very funny.
Super triggered.
Meanwhile, like everyone that supports him is like, oh my God, this is basically like they're declaring civil war.
Oh, fucking
kind of shit,
Fuck people.
Just overblowing everything. Like,
Christ.
They regularly talk about just genociding people, and then they're like, oh, well, it's just jokes, or,
Right, yeah.
It's just like the obvious thing to do, or whatever.
Yeah.
And now they're like, wow, Hassan Piker said that 9/11 was good. Which it was, let's be honest. I guess I don't have anything else, do you?
You're the one who did all the research, so.
There is one more thing that I found earlier this week, just a brief little thing. American Airlines to pay $22 million U.S. fine over mail delivery times. So they were like committing mass fraud, saying like underreporting their delivery times. So they lost a lawsuit. Now they have to pay $22 million. Haha. It's not much for them, but
Yeah.
Better than nothing, I guess.
Like one CEO, for a year.
Yeah.
I guess I've been posting a bit about it, but I think like Whitey doesn't care that much. But like,
there's reasons for that. So West Papua, if anybody knows what the fuck that is, West Papua is a province in Indonesia that is actually one of. It's a long story, but basically, may or may not have talked about this before, but the west side of the island of Papua, right, which is a very large island, has been historically called West Papua. Then the Indonesian government, right, the state, with the encouragement of the United States, took over the Republic of West Papua after it basically declared its own independence after the I'm a little murky on exactly how that happened, but basically after the Japanese and the Dutch had both been kind of, ass kicked out of Indonesia as we know it now. Then there was a bunch of regional autonomy movements, because of course, fucking duh, of course, after living under the fucking colonial boot for hundreds of years, you want to do your own thing. But the Indonesian state, which had been set up by a bunch of, it was a coalition, and we won't get into that. You can read about it, or I can talk to you about it later.
Let me guess. It was set up by people who were formerly friendly with the colonial administration and led it in the first place.
Pretty much, yeah. So it was
shocking.
Yeah, exactly. In Indonesia, it was a tripartite coalition of Islamists, so people who wanted an Islamic republic, communists, and it was the largest communist party?
So good guys. And then who else?
Yeah, exactly. And nationalists. So,
okay. Good guys and bad guys.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So they all knew, as you often see in especially the kind of state building eras in the 20th century and 19th century, they all knew they couldn't win alone. So they worked together, knowing that they'd all eventually stab each other in the back later. As we know now, the communists.
But I'll be the first one.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. Communists lost the knife fight, and then the Islamists and the nationalists decided to just kind of agree to, chill on the rest.
Well, you know what they say: never bring a knife to a mech suit fight.
Basically, yeah. Especially when the U.S. is basically funding the coup. So, yeah. So then they decided, West Papua, this area called West Papua, which had declared its independence, or which eventually declared its independence, because everybody was it was just a shit show. Anyway, they were like, this place is full of fucking resources, and the people there are mostly kind of, in many ways, analogous to the people of the South Pacific Islands, or of the Amazon, or of let's say
so
parts
indigenous
of
Austronesians, basically.
Yes, indigenous Austronesians, exactly, and Highlands people and Fisher people and stuff like that. So then the state was like, actually, this is ours now. Annexed it. It was bloody. They cracked down on resistance pretty hard. And they called it Irian Jaya. And when I was growing up, that's what it was still called. And that name didn't change until several years ago. Irian Jaya means literally glorious conquest. So, math completely off on this shit.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, imagine being an indigenous person living in a place called Glorious Conquest, right?
Yeah.
Fuck off, right? Although many people, of course, indigenous to the Americas, for example, or Africa, I'm sure could relate. To
everywhere it's called Columbus or Columbia.
Yeah, exactly. What the fuck? So right. So this shit. So essentially, it's post-colonial colonialism. In this fucked up, weird, sort of shit. The logic of the state, right? So anyway, so West Papua is called Irian Jaya for like decades, and part of the whole deal was there's this. It's the the largest gold mine and the third largest copper mine in the world in a specific site in West Papua. It's called the Grasberg Mine. The Grasberg Mine is owned by Freeport-McMoRan, which is a U.S. conglomerate.
Oh boy.
This was part of the deal, basically. Yeah, so basically this whole thing was a way for Indonesia, the state, not the people per se, but the state, and U.S. corporate power to both win by cooperating to obviously exploit the land and the people. So then there's been flare-ups ever since. There were like freedom movements that started in like the 70s and have gone since. I mean, technically, of course, there's freedom movements pretty much as soon as troops hit the ground, right? But like formal movements, I think, started in the 70s, and then they've been duking it out ever since in like spats and spars and shit, like every now and then. Recently, as of like last week, I want to say, Indonesian Independence Day just happened on the 17th, and there was, you know how this shit always goes with like inter-ethnic political, nationalist bullshit, like where somebody sees somebody, doing something to their fucking flag, right? And then all fucking restraints hold me back, boys. Like I'm gonna fuck up this guy who's slightly browner than me, right? In this case, So basically, in Surabaya, which is Eastern Java, which is like one of the major cities in the West, right? So one of the kind of consumer cities, one of the kind of more imperial cities, if you want to take that analysis about the relationship to the rest of the country, and this is both, again, this is both like kind of imperial core versus periphery kind of shit, post-colonial colonialism kind of shit, and it's also inter-ethnic. Like, it's a very diverse place, but there are certain dominant ethnic groups, and of course there are dominant cities. So Surabaya is a city that is both economically fairly dominant, and also is home to people who are ethnically and politically dominant, right? Not as much obviously as Jakarta, but it's pretty far up there. So some people were like, these Papuan students, right, who were there for fucking college or something. I saw them defiling the Indonesian flag. So they threw it down a well or something, right? So first off, if they did, good for them. I love Indonesia, but like statism is no good, and nationalism is definitely a fucking toxin. So so then that turned into these guys went back. These students, I guess, were in their dorm or something, and they got it was something like they got barricaded in by a mob of fucking people saying a bunch of like racist chants and shit against them, right? And just saying all this fucking shit, which of course Papuans are used to, they're constantly kind of like maligned and looked down on and abused, just for fucking existing. And again, this is, we know how this goes, and it's really sad. Anyway, so these fucking students are getting like fucking besieged in their own residence. Who knows the veracity of what happened? Who knows what the fuck is going on with them and any involvement with like defacing or defiling or whatever a flag. But this fucking mob turns out and sort of terrorizes them and shit. So then, since then, in West Papua, basically a bunch of very sizable, very loud and energetic demonstrations came up, and then also a bunch of others came up in cities across the country, even as far as Sumatra, which is like the westernmost island, and they were all pretty sizable. Like there was anarchist action, which like I've noticed seems to be rising in Indonesia, which is interesting to watch. Yeah, and they like blocked a road with like a sit down protest. And the Papuans, it's been interesting because the Papuans, they get a lot of shit for being these indigenous people, right? And you know, I don't want to oversimplify this, and I don't want to like just transpose one thing onto another because it's not really the same, but there are many resonances. But they're kind of like they're like the black people of Indonesia, right? In many ways, but in other ways, they're like the indigenous Americans. You know, like they're just all rolled into one in a way. And so a lot of these like others, especially from the Western provinces, call them like monkeys, right? Like, yeah. So in the protests, you saw them take it two ways. Some of them were reclaiming it, right? And even in one protest, there was like a Papuan kid who was like jumping around doing like monkey-like movements, like intentionally just kind of like throw it back. And then others, of course, were holding signs that were more blatantly just like, we are the people of Papua. We're not monkeys, you know? And it sucks that it has to be said at all, right? But they're just being super bold. And now, as of like, I think yesterday, the Indonesian military has landed and there's an internet blackout. And I just saw a photo. I can't confirm because it was just a photo shared on Twitter by somebody affiliated with like the Free Papua movement, Free West Papua movement. But it's just like this kid, like just like dead on the ground, like fucking guts out and everything. And I was just like, oh, Jesus Christ. So, you know, my Western Twitter friends are generally not picking this up, but I really wish they fucking would because it's kind of getting to me. Like, it may not be anybody's cause celeb, but like it's a big fucking deal, and it has exactly to do with everything else we're fighting. You know.
Yeah, there's just so much shit happening right now. It's fucking crazy.
Exactly. Like, I do understand that like it's happening exactly at the same time as these fucking burnings in the Amazon. And
arsons. Let's call them arsons.
Yeah. And all the shootings obviously are just ongoing. And
Epstein and all that stuff.
Right? Like Jesus Christ! Like August isn't even fucking over.
And then Kashmir,
right?
That whole situation. There's just so much shit.
God. Yeah. So anyway, right now, I don't know. By the time this episode's posted, it may not still be, but like right now, my Avi is the Republic of West Papua flag. Just doing the ML thing and just like flying an independence flag, because that's the flag they chose for themselves, and that's the one that they've been flying at the protests and stuff. So, at the very least, that's meaningful. So, but I wish I could do more, but that's about it.
So I looked up Freeport McMoran, and on Wikipedia it says in August 2017, the company agreed to give a 51% interest in the Grosberg mine to the government of Indonesia and build a smelter in exchange for a special permit to operate the mine until 2041.
Yep. Good old horse trading.
And then last year, Joko Widodo, who is the president of Indonesia, took 51% control of Freeport Indonesia's equity, which involved them settling payments of $3.85 billion.
Yep.
Which they finalized December 21st, 2018.
Yeah. So in that kind of differential accumulation kind of way, like they're doing the right thing, like they're doing the smart thing, which is trying to like gain control of the future of this exploitation, right? To accrue that to themselves. In the nationalist sense, it makes perfect sense. It's unfortunate that any use of extraction and use of this material comes at the expense of so much and of so many people, and has already done.
Man, we need to stop ending on these depressing notes. We should lead with them.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't really have anything else to add.
Well, if you hate listens to that, check out our shit.
But yeah, so we support Indonesian independence, Papuan independence, and really all non-fascist independence movements that are out there.
Exactly. I can support Indonesian independence, and I can support West Papuan independence. Yep. They don't have to exist at the expense of each other.
I think everyone should be their own country.
Yeah, basically.
Everyone gets to design a flag. It's just like creating your own nation in history class.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Everything's just
everyone gets a motto and a constitution.
Exactly.
So I guess that's all we have today. If you enjoyed that, check out our other episodes at neighborsciencepodcast.com. I decided today that I'm going to start grouping episodes into series, so it's easier to find a topic. So this is going to be part of the colonial business series, which I'm going to retroactively put the Dutch East India Company episode and the sugar trade episode into. And I think, didn't we also do one on tea and coffee? I don't know if we talked about colonialism there.
Yeah, we talked about coffee and tea. I think we talked very tangentially about like colonials and stuff. But,
okay, because I thought of doing that as a full episode. Maybe we can still do that if we didn't talk about the colonial aspects of it.
Yeah.
Plus, it's just fun to talk about tea and coffee. So look out for that. I'll try and get it set up this weekend if I can. I do have a lot of editing to do, so we'll see. Although a lot of that is just sitting there, so I'll have time to fuck around with the website quickly. You can follow our Twitter at NeighborSidePod. Leave us a review on iTunes if you have it, and if you don't, just tell your friends. What else? I'm at Handle of Rye. Kris is at Solidarity_Goth.
Yep.
Patreon.com/NeighborScience is our Patreon. We still haven't really gotten to bonus episodes, but we did just record one that we are going to early release it on the Patreon. So I'm thinking we're going to do that more in the future. So if you pay, what do you think? Any amount or over a certain amount? I think just any amount would be good. You can listen to those episodes a month early. And then if you don't want to pay because you already pay for 50 podcasts like me, then you can just wait and then it'll eventually come to your feed. Yeah.
Cool.
I think that's it.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Love you.